It is my pleasure to welcome one of our many, many wonderful clients, and that is Jonathan Hau. He and his wife have been investing for several years now, and he's transitioning or has transitioned, I guess, from the software business and then being in a couple startups over the years to doing real estate full time. Jonathan, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing great.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Thanks for coming on. We always love these case studies. The listeners tell us that's one of the best things is when they hear other people's stories and how other people are doing it. It's just great. So, yeah, give us a little bit of your background, maybe to start with, Jonathan. You lived in the Bay Area where all the startups are, and I know you were involved in a few of those.
Yes, yes, yeah. So I lived in the Bay Area in San Francisco for most of my life, up until around 2017 when I moved to Portland, Oregon with my family. And we were just, trying to get out of the rat racy Bay Area. And that turned out to be a really great move for our family. But while we were in Portland in 2018, we sort of became accidental real estate investors.
Right.
And that was sort of what started us on a journey of investing in long-term rentals. And, we've been really enjoying the experience.
Excellent, excellent. So you were in the San Francisco Bay Area, then you moved to Portland, and then became an accidental real estate investor. And what you mean there is you had a personal residence you converted to a rental, right?
That's right. Yeah, we wanted to move to a different part of Portland that we were attracted to. And we found a home and we were thinking about the decision whether or not to sell our primary residence or to rent it out. And at the time, the interest rates were super low. So we were like, why would we want to give up that interest rate if we can just get another loan at a low interest rate and
Exactly.
rent out our existing home?
Yeah, and just to give the listeners some context on that, we talked a little bit before we started the show, and you were originally of the mindset, pay down your mortgages, pay off your mortgage if you can. And then you had a friend that told you to use leverage as a wealth building tool, right?
That's right. Yeah. Initially, we thought, we wanted to pay down our debt as quickly as possible so that we just didn't owe anything and we could keep our expenses low and just live humble means, save up more cash for retirement and that sort of thing. But our really wise friend basically told us, it doesn't really make sense if the interest rates are low right now because, you could take that time to pay it back slowly and use the cash to invest elsewhere. And of course, we didn't know what to invest it in at the time, but we thought about that. And then we realized, it totally does make sense to leverage. And leveraging using the mortgage basically was what we found to be really helpful in taking that money and investing it in another home, which was our primary residence.
Yeah, excellent, excellent choice. And when people buy properties, they have the choice. They can either try and put as much cash into the property as possible, or they can put as little into it as possible and leverage that property. And, the famous philosopher, mathematician from ages ago, Archimedes, said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I will move the entire world. And that's what leverage does for us. It increases our power. That's leverage. And the thing people don't realize a lot of time is when they put a lot of cash into a property, or maybe the property's appreciated and they've got a lot of equity into it, same idea, there's an opportunity cost to that money sitting there not doing anything. It's not working for you. And so I'm really glad you realized that. And I'm glad so many others have, but there's still a lot of people that haven't realized that. And we have facts to back it up because about 40% of the country owns their home free and clear. Can you imagine those people? Basically, almost half the country is not getting the benefit of leverage. And so, of course, the leverage magnifies your return, and that's good. It reduces your risk. That's kind of counterintuitive, but I've talked about that on the show. And then, of course, it gives you inflation-induced debt destruction. It's just the wisest choice pretty much always. Jonathan, I did a video a long time ago you may have seen where I talked about like the only time to ever pay cash for your house or to pay your house off. And it would be you live in either Texas or Florida, right? And you live in Texas, you're in the Dallas area, I know. I used to live in Florida, or I guess technically I still do, but not for long. Those states have great homestead asset protection laws. And The only reason even then you'd want to do it is if you just have so much cash, you need a place to park it, right? There's really no other reason. So yeah, it's great that you
Yeah.
realize that.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was on your show where I heard basically this comment, which really kind of stuck in my mind, which is when you leverage, you would never take out a loan to put money in the stock market, right?
Right.
Some people do this, and some day
Mm-hmm.
traders who are very confident, who have a
Yep.
long track record of being successful in investing in the stock market, can do this successfully.
Mm-hmm.
I would, as an individual, never take out a massive loan to
Right.
leverage and invest in the stock market. But with real estate, it's very different. It's something that normal people do every day. You
Yep.
know, the system for getting a mortgage loan is designed for safety.
Yep.
And, when my wife and I started looking at real estate loans, so these are investor loans, standard conventional investor loans,
Mm-hmm.
the banks do all the underwriting to ensure
Right. Yeah.
that the amount of rental income that can be generated from the property will cover the mortgage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're not really great with numbers, and I'm definitely not one of those people, trying and attempting to get a loan from a bank is far easier to leverage and take money out in order to purchase an investment property,
Yeah.
and then trying to do that in the stock market.
Right, right. No, in the stock market, you can usually do a margin, right? And you can basically do 50% margin, but you can get a margin call, when that stock goes down in value. And it can be very risky. And the interest rate on those margin loans is pretty high. So it just doesn't make sense because the real estate has got different characteristics, as we've talked about before. I know you've been listening to my show for a few years and you've heard me say it probably, right? Where you've got the income, and the income is what pays for the debt. And you just can't really get a margin call on real estate very easily. I mean, I guess you could, but it's just not very easy to have that happen. That's why it's just such a historically proven investment. And the whole system incentivizes the getting a mortgage and having a big mortgage because you get the tax benefit, you get lower risk. And, arguably now I'd say inflation is 5 or 6% in real terms. I mean, the government's telling us it's lower than that, but, 5, 6%, right? So if you have $1 million in loans, just inflation alone is paying off $50,000 a year. Can you imagine that? If you're making 100,000 at your job, right? It's like getting a 50% raise. You're getting $50,000 in extra income. It's not income specifically, but it builds your wealth. It's wealth building. So
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
really
I mean,
powerful.
there's so many advantages to it behind the scenes that I think people don't really think through long term. But I think in retrospect, as we've been slowly building our small portfolio, we've really seen the power of how leverage can really help build wealth over a long period of time. It takes a long time. I mean, it's definitely not a get rich quick scheme, but
Mhm.
it's definitely something that I think has the potential to build wealth for many over a long period of time.
Yeah, yeah, no question about it. So, what attracted you to real estate? I mean, it was before your wise friend told you to use leverage. You were interested in real estate, right?
Yes, and I think just as sort of like a natural knack, my wife and I, we love going to open houses,
Uh huh.
and just looking at home layouts, room designs, just the way that things are oriented.
Hmm.
We're always looking for opportunities or homes that we think would be a great place for our family to stay in, and of
Yep.
course, location matters a whole lot, of course. But I think the thing that really sort of changed my perspective on real estate investing was for a number of years we had asked a property manager to help us manage our properties. And, we paid, I think, somewhere around 8 to 10% for their services. And we thought it's a relatively okay deal for them to help us out with that. But then we realized once the contract is signed and once, the tenant is placed, it's really not that much effort
Yeah,
to
I agree. Yeah.
to manage tenants. And, that was something that I started to look more into. And then I realized, hey, why am I paying a property manager to manage my properties if I can manage it myself?
Couldn't agree more. And good property managers are extremely rare. They're like the unicorn. You're in the tech business, or you were in the tech business. You know what a unicorn is, right? They're rare, definitely. So it's certainly true. Sometimes, and you've heard me say this on the show, of course, Jonathan. I would argue that it's actually easier to manage yourself than having a manager,
It's
because the
fine.
manager has a separate agenda and they get in the way. And that wasn't always that way. That wasn't always that way throughout history because we didn't have the tools and the technology we have today. But today, you don't need a manager. Listen, I'm saying this, and the vast majority of our clients have managers, right? But I'm trying to talk them out of it. I'm trying to get them to see the virtues of self management. And what they usually do is they peel off one of their properties, two of their properties, and they start managing themselves. They see how easy it is. And then they're just like, Jason, I'm all in on self management. Much easier. Yeah.
And let me tell you something. Could I share a story?
Yeah. And it's way more profitable too, not just to mention that, ease.
That's right.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago in Portland, one of our properties had a tree that was damaged during an ice storm.
Mm-hmm.
And the property manager that we had hired at the time called me up and said, "Hey, the tenant has reported that this tree is sort of leaning in a dangerous direction, and we're going to need to kind of take care of having
Mm-hmm.
this tree cut down and
Yep.
processed." So I said, "Okay, well, how much is the quote from a tree company to take care of the tree?" They said it's $3,000. I
Wow.
said,
Yeah.
"Really?" I thought to myself, this price doesn't seem right. I know that, it's sort of extenuating circumstances. We have an ice storm in that area, but I decided to just make a couple of different phone calls and find a different tree service to see if I could get a better price. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I made one phone call, and the very first tree company that picked up the phone said they'll do it for a third of the cost.
Yep.
And I said, if it took me just like 10 minutes to
Yeah.
make one phone call, and my property manager, whom I'm paying a monthly fee to help do a job for me,
Yeah.
they're not doing any services to help save me any money.
Yeah, I
I
know.
asked
I know.
myself, why am I?
They're usually getting some sort of kickback or incentive from the vendor. Look, compared to Wall Street, the amount of ripping off that a property manager can do is pretty small, right? But it's just irritating. We want to optimize our return on investment and get as much as we can. Now, Jonathan, you haven't been listening to my show long enough, but maybe you hear the Flashback Fridays or got into the old episodes, but I told this story years ago about a tree. It was just like yours. I don't remember the exact numbers, so don't quote me on the numbers. The old show is up there. You can listen to it, but I'll just generally tell the concept. It was a property in Charlotte, North Carolina. I never saw the property in my life, right? I had it for a couple of years. It was great. Everything was great. I did have a manager back then. That was before I was into self management. It was a long time ago. And a big tree in the backyard fell down, and it was a big tree. Okay. And the property manager says, hey, we're going to have someone remove the tree. It's going to be $3,600. And this was years ago. Okay. So, adjusted for inflation, that's like 5,000 today, maybe, or something. Anyway, what I did is I placed an ad on Craigslist and I put the property manager's information in the ad. And suddenly they're getting all these quotes, right? And they had to do something about it. They got a little angry with me. They called me up and said, what are you doing? And I said, hey, I'm trying to get my tree. I'm trying to get some quotes on my tree problem here. And these quotes were coming in so much lower than the manager. Now, admittedly, on Craigslist, you'll get anybody and their brother. Okay. They're not necessarily professional companies. They don't necessarily have insurance. You got to be careful. Okay. But some of them are very legit established companies that'll just look for opportunities on Craigslist. Okay. And nowadays we use things like TaskRabbit and Thumbtack as well. Okay. But back then it was Craigslist. That was the thing. Yes. And turns out I got quotes for like less than a third of what the manager's quote was. Okay. And I forwarded them to the manager because people were emailing them to me. Right. And somehow, miraculously, Jonathan, it was just magic. Somehow the property manager still used the same contractor and got that tree removed for like less than half the price. It was just magic. I don't know. We didn't even use another vendor. We used the one they suggested first. But magically. They
I
just gave such a better deal. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. Yeah. So
love it. Yeah.
it was amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
the
crazy.
power of leverage. But, I think that it goes to show that, just a little bit of effort
Oh, very little effort too. Yeah.
can make such a change in the way that the negotiation discussion occurs. And
Absolutely.
that's something that I think I've started to learn over the years, which I didn't realize was so powerful, but it really does have a powerful effect in being able to negotiate much better terms.
Absolutely. And you know what people have to realize, Jonathan? They have to realize that what they're paying their property manager is false advertising. Because if
Mm,
that property manager charges you, 6%, 8%, 10%, whatever, that's not what you're really paying them. You're overpaying for things. You're having tenants that aren't as happy, that don't stay as long, that don't renew as much. The property manager is keeping late fees a lot of times. They're charging way more than they say. Yeah, it's really crazy. But anyway, we're off on a tangent here. So, what are your plans for your real estate portfolio? Any questions you have, feel free to fire away. And
speaking of the whole cyclical versus linear
yep,
market cycles and hybrid markets, I think we are very much, in the Sarah Liskey camp where we like to invest in both linear and cyclical,
mm-hmm.
and look in markets where there could be a potential increase, if things are,
Yep.
not.
There's really one market where you can kind of play both sides of that fairly well, and it's Phoenix. The
Yes.
Phoenix metro is a boom and bust town. Right now, there's a lot of properties on the market here. I happen to be sitting in Scottsdale when I'm recording this. This is a market where you can get those big upswings without the terrible cash flow and the tenant friendliness and landlord hatred that you
Yes.
get in a place like California or Oregon or Washington State. All of those markets are they're just terrible to landlords. Okay. And
Yeah.
by the way, that's a cost that doesn't show up on the pro forma. Okay. So,
Mhm.
if you have like a California property, for example, or an Oregon property, and you have a tenant problem, it's going to be very difficult. The courts and the regulations will side with the tenant, not with you. And that could cost you a lot of money. Whereas in a place more like Arizona, which is much more landlord friendly, not the most landlord friendly. The most landlord friendly state in the country is Arkansas, but Arizona's pretty good, and you'll just have a better overall experience in a market like that.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, areas where there's strong job growth and strong commercial growth always
Mm-hmm.
means that, families and households are going to want to move into those areas.
Yep.
And for those reasons, those will always be areas where, long term, there will be appreciation.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And you're paying for the privilege of having that big upswing that, will inevitably come when, market's crazy again, rates are crazy. It's pretty boring right now, obviously, but it'll come for sure. The other thing in terms of, look, I'm not a market timer, right? But if you're going to time the market, okay, I would say the key is to get in the market and get properties purchased before Powell leaves. Okay. When
Okay.
Jerome Powell leaves, we are most assuredly going to see lower. I mean, I would bet a lot of money that we will definitely see lower rates. And, Powell's probably going to do two cuts before he goes. Thought seems to be he'll do two cuts this year. Then he's gone, next spring for sure, if Trump can't get him out sooner. But as soon as that changes, things will change very, very rapidly in terms of the market. I mean, existing supply will get gobbled up quickly and prices will start to go up, and we're going to see some bidding wars again, unless the population declines or we add a whole bunch of millions of new houses suddenly somehow.
I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
I agree.
But yeah, it's interesting. I appreciate that insight. And I think when it comes to timing, like nobody really knows for sure. But I
No, you
think
don't.
that you have
Nobody
like a
knows.
really strong hunch about that. But I think we are always actively looking, and we're always looking in different pockets. Going to open houses and seeing what's out there.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that insight because I think it's really wise advice.
Good stuff. Hey, I got to ask you, are you using my AI chatbot?
I
Everybody
haven't
listening
tried
needs
it.
to start using that. It's
I have
incredible.
not tried it yet. I'll look into it after the call.
It is trained on almost everything I know. So you can you can ask it questions, and it's just available 24/7. It's a great tool.
That's cool.
The folks that are using it talk to us about it all the time, and they just absolutely love it. So take
That's,
advantage of that. It's jasonhartman.com/AI. Just a great
okay.
free tool for you. Yeah.
Okay. I'll definitely look at that.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, Jonathan, thanks for sharing your case study and just chit chatting with me about some other stuff too, and a few rants. But anything you'd like people to know before you go about investing or anything?
I think the main thing that I would tell myself, my earlier self, if I were thinking about investing, is really aim for the long term
Mm-hmm.
and think about how property appreciation can really build over time,
Mm-hmm.
and be patient with your investing because there's nothing like being patient and waiting for something to grow over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if suddenly got rich really, really quickly. Well, then you would spend the money really, really quickly as well.
Right.
But saving it over a long period of time teaches individuals how to be patient and know how to spend it wisely as well,
Yeah.
when you get into your more mature years.
That's a really good point. And, I guess you could look at that from two sides, right? Saving to buy the investment is one side, but the other side is at the very least, in the worst case, you know what real estate is? It's a forced savings program in the worst case. I have a friend who I recently saw on someone else's YouTube channel. He's made a lot of money in his life and lost a lot of money, and he's very reckless about his spending. Okay. When he's got money, he just blows it all like immature. Okay. And, he's not young anymore. Okay. But he just blows money. You just can't save it. And I saw him being interviewed by this other guy, and he says, the thing that's been the best for me in all my life is the real estate because it keeps me from spending all my money. It's hard to get to the asset, right? You got to refinance it or, get a home equity line or something to get the cash out. And, it's just hard to access, so he didn't spend that money and he built up substantial wealth over the years with the real estate. So
Yeah, wise words.
yeah, it's good. Good stuff. Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for sharing your story. We really appreciate you coming on. All of you listening out there, we'd love to have you on the show. If you're a client, you've got a case study to share. We've had some great ones over the years. And Jonathan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason.